One of the things that I've been talking about recently in my videos is that it almost seems to me that it's when the talking starts, when the prayer finishes and the talking starts, that's when all the rubbish comes out. That's when all the nitpicking and the sectarianism strikes up. There's precious little prayer going on in most churches today, be they um, Catholic, be they Orthodox, be they Protestant. I set that challenge. I know that there's pastors, etc., that do listen in, probably shocked to the hilt with some of the stuff I come out with, but I will say it nevertheless. There's precious little prayer going on in so many churches today. Now, they can pull out the stops. The Orthodox pull out the stops for Lent. Great, 3 or 4 times a week, different things going on in the evenings. Um, but what about the rest of the year, chaps? Is God only real in the Lent? Do we only need prayer in the Lent? So it's kind of funny. It's precious. It's kind of tragic. There's precious little prayer going on. One group meets on a Friday during the day. Oh, great for prayer. Another Catholic group, the same, Friday during the morning. Great. That's a pensioners club. That's for the Silver Hair Brigade. And the church is rapidly becoming a church of the Silver Hair Brigade, catered for pensioners. And it suits the lifestyle of the priests. So we can have the services in the morning and then swan off to our daily tasks. Yeah, but what about us working people? Anyway, this is not going to be a rant. Um, what I want to discuss here is this idea that it's when the talking starts that all the Muppetry begins. When the talking starts, the Muppetry begins. This is why we instinctively look at orders like, the Carthusians, École de Silence, by a Chartreuse. This is why we look at the Carthusians and think, absolutely fantastic. Well, the book, the film integrates silence there. Um, Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton. These are iconic books of silence and prayer, and we're all refreshed by this, of course. All the nonsense starts when the speaking kicks in. Now, I'm not saying that there's no value in speaking and conversing. Of course, there is, but there must be somewhere the sweet ratio, because if it's too much koinonia and not enough prayer, then it all goes to shreds. The Desert Fathers used to meet on a Sunday for a blether. The Carthusians still do that. And the rest of the week, they're in silence. They have their prayer rule. They have their solitary work, and they meet in the liturgy and what the Roman Catholics call the liturgy and the prayers, in the daily prayers and in the Mass. But if we're meeting for the service and then our koinonia lasts 3 times longer than the service, and when the prayer service itself becomes a place for koinonia, for chitter chat, then we start to have issues. And also maybe, when our study of the word precedes our hearing of the word, when our study of theology takes over, then we've got real issues. And I think it was in this context that this book here, Zen and the Birds of Appetite, has something to say to us all. It's like, don't, Thomas Merton quotes Wittgenstein, who said, don't look, see. No, don't talk, see. And I think that's what Thomas Merton was looking for within Zen, was this direct experience of reality as it is. Nothing to do with Buddhism. I don't think he was hankering after following Buddha. He comes across in this book as actually very well grounded in Christianity. I'm very happy with what Christianity is and represents. But I think he wanted beyond a kind of word sandwich that theology can so easily become among the professed Christians, where it becomes all about precise faith, exact faith, splitting hairs over the most minute dogmas and beliefs. And we miss the mystery of God. So easily we can start to think we are the armchair experts, whether we're in an armchair or not, that we know it all, almost like we've got the hotline to God and God's whispering in our ear continually. Now, in Christianity, we do have this sense of the revelatory experience, that it's revealed by the word and in the life of the church. And he talks about how this business of sentire cum ecclesia, to experience with the church, or to feel with the church, is key, that it should be something which is available for all and is in harmony with the experience of the life of the church. And this has led theologians to put down in writing the mystical experiences by the word, by words, and by symbols. But the danger is, even though these are useful, the danger is the words take over. For me of late, and very recently, I'm finding just the power of old-fashioned prayer, of just, saying evening prayers, night prayers, praying the rosary, doing the Jesus prayer, soaking in prayer, as opposed to spending hours on the YouTube or the internet. Very, very helpful and very, very joy-giving, life-giving. And in that context, I've felt, well, I've no real need to practice Zazen. I've no real need to practice mindfulness meditation. It may be helpful with a bit of centering, but then again, the fruit of prayer is, it does center you, especially if one is going and seeking the deep heart, such as in the prayer of the East and Eastern Orthodoxy. But Thomas Merton asks the question here in this book, can a Christian practice Zen? And he says, well, Zen's nothing to do with Buddhism and philosophy and theology. There is a branch of Zen about placing it within that tradition. But Zen is simply sitting, just sitting, especially in the Soto tradition. And the koans are just ways of getting you out of your head, out of the cage of conceptualism. Because he says the danger is we just build a conceptual framework. I believe in this, this, and this, and I see the world as this, this, and this. And then everything that we experience has to be filtered through that conceptual cage, when the reality is, of course, God is always more than any of our concepts and ideas. And there's, with a huge complexity, the reality of God is, there's always going to be multiple ways of looking at something. Recently I was asked to give an assembly, not to give it was a small group of people. And I was asked, it was on the LGBT Pride Month. And, one could look at that as a Christian. I know people who've left teaching because of that. Oh, I can't do this. You shouldn't make me do this, blah, blah, blah. Big fuss made. Is it necessarily a threat to my Christian faith to educate on this matter, to simply present and trust that people are on their own journey and will come to their own conclusions in their own time? And it doesn't matter what I, as a pontificating teacher, want to profess, people are on their own journey. And so looking at things from multiple angles is a fruit of sitting, just being, just being. Is that so? Just being can help to soften some of the contours of fundamentalism. To then hear with new freshness the revelation that is in Christ Jesus, as opposed to being somebody who says, "Oh, I'm a Christian 20 years, 30 years," and actually they've got 2 years of real experience repeated, repeated and repeated and repeated. I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's useful. Maybe just to give a flavor of the book. I have done something on this book in the past. It is a classic. There's a little interview but with a dialogue between these two great men at the end of this book, about 40 pages worth. Thomas just writes so well. Here we go. With no birds singing, the mountain is yet more still. I took this, I think, from the book. A master's handiwork cannot be measured, but still priests wag their tongues. I'm not trying to be anti-clerical when I say this, but Zen itself was a kind of a back to the roots movement, a back to basic human autonomy. I got into such a thing when I first became Orthodox. I'm like, I've got to be a monk again, to be part of the action, to really, because God is in that box. God is in that temple. And it was really hard for me to see the point in remaining in the world. God is just as much in the world as he is in a monastery. Although I love visiting monasteries, of course. But we cannot box God. A master's handiwork cannot be measured, but still priests wag their tongues, explain the way, and babbling about Zen. This old monk has never cared for false piety, and my nose wrinkles at the dark smell of incense before the Buddha. It's a kind of an aniconic tradition. It's a kind of a impious, if that's the right word, look at things. Zen always kind of forces you to kind of just look at things from a different angle, or just silence all of that chatter in the mind. But at the end of the day, as I say, prayer is something unique. It's something that's maybe lacking from this tradition. But Thomas Merton makes the point. You can't just compare the two, because comparing the two is comparing apples and oranges. Of course, the orange is not an apple. It doesn't claim to be. Can they coexist? And opening the hand of thought here, Thomas Merton certainly wanted to explore their coexistence in his own life. I think probably one of the reasons for that was to get beyond what he actually mentions in this book is the kind of caricature of Christianity. Christianity is brilliant, actually, the bit that he talks about. So he's so eloquent when he's writing about this, about the caricature of Christianity, when it becomes all about, I've got the right set of beliefs, I've got the right set of thoughts. Not so much the experience of the inner meaning of Christian revelation. It's necessarily distorted and diminished in such a theological setting. What will such experience be? Not so much a living theological experience of the presence of God in the world and in mankind through the mystery of Christ, but rather a sense of security in one's own correctness. How often do we get a whiff of this? around the table after services, a feeling of confidence that one has been saved, a confidence which is based on the reflex awareness that one holds the correct view of the creation and purpose of the world, and that one's behavior is of a kind to be rewarded in the next life, or even one's set of beliefs, one could argue in the Protestant circles, sola fide. Or perhaps, since few can attain this level of self-assurance, then the Christian experience becomes one of anxious hope, a struggle with occasional doubt of the right answers, a painful and constant effort to meet the severe demands of morality and law, and a somewhat desperate recourse to the sacraments which are there to help the weak who must constantly fall and rise again. This, of course, he says, is a sadly deficient account of true Christian experience based on a distortion of the true import of Christian revelation. Yet it is the impression non-Christians often get of Christianity from the outside looking in. And when one proceeds to compare, say, Zen experience in its purity with this disturbed and distorted type of Christian experience, then one's comparison is just as meaningless and misleading as a comparison of Christian philosophy and theology on their highest and most sophisticated level with the myths of a popular and decadent Buddhism. We often see these comparisons being made on the internet. But, he rightly goes on to say, which Christianity are we going to compare? And what are we going to compare? Mysticism, Christian theology, worship? Is it going to be Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy? Is it going to be Byzantine, Syriac, Oriental? Protestantism? Is it going to be the Protestantism of Luther or that of Bonhoeffer? Is it the Protestantism of the God is Dead school? The Catholicism of St. Thomas, or is it of Father B. Griffiths or Henry Rousseau or Thomas Merton himself? Which Catholicism? Or of St. Augustine? The Western Fathers or the Eastern? Is it a social gospel, a demythologized Christianity? And what do we mean by Buddhism? Is it the Theravadan school, that of Burma, the Tantric Buddhism, Pure Land, the speculative and scholastic Indian Buddhism, or Zen? And now D.T. Suzuki, as he goes on to say here, he focused on just one theologian. He focused on Meister Eckhart of the 14th century, and he gives some interesting take on that book by D.T. Suzuki, which is worth a read, definitely. But I feel like I've said enough now on this great book. I think what Thomas Merton wanted to do was keep things fresh, was keep his faith alive and fresh. And therefore he went knocking on the door of stillness and quiet and silence. And he was intrigued to see how that might benefit Christians at the dawn of the post-Vatican era and pre-Vatican era. Clearly, he saw the distortions, such as we mentioned there, and knew that something had to change or Christianity would die. As Karl Rahner famously said, the Christians of the future will either be mystics or they simply won't exist. God bless. I hope that's useful.